So our next speaker is Sean Kiernan. He is a student with Cesar Kleberg Wildlife Research Institute at Texas A&M in Kingsville. And he will be talking on landscape connectivity and spatial ecology for an endangered carnivore, how ocelots move near transportation infrastructure.
All right, can you all hear me? Sweet. So my name is Sean Kiernan, and today I'm a master's student at Texas A&M-Kingsville, and today I'll be presenting on some of my master's thesis work, some preliminary data that I have, and it's titled Small Steps, Big Barriers, How Elusive South Texas Felids Interact with Roads. So I want to start out by introducing some of the felids of South Texas. And I want to start by looking at the bobcat. And the bobcat has a short bobtail with ear tufts, and they're considered a generalist species and are widespread throughout North America. And within North America, they occupy a bunch of different habitats, including in South Texas, where they occur in high densities. And then in South Texas, they coexist with the ocelot. And the ocelot has a bold rosette pattern and slender build. And both of these cats are medium-sized. But the ocelot is a thorn scrub specialist in South Texas, and specifically the Tamaulipan thorn scrub. And it's characterized by vertical and horizontal cover. And basically, if you can't walk through it, then that's where you most likely find ocelots. And they're federally endangered, and there's less than 100 individuals left in the wild in the US. And this population is over 100 miles away from the nearest population in Mexico. So it's pretty isolated. And the thorn scrub areas are in two distinct areas that we like to call the ranch population and the refuge population. And the ranch population is characterized by private ranches, and the refuge is Laguna Atascosa National Wildlife Refuge in South Texas. And I want to talk a little bit about the expansion of humans in South Texas. And you can see just how big of a increase that we're expected to see in South Texas. And specifically, this is the Rio Grande Valley metropolitan area. And there's 3 different cities that combine to form this area. And the dark green is the thorn scrub, which is more woody and oak habitats that are mixed in with it. And this is where you're most likely to find the ocelots. And as the expansion keeps growing, you'll see less and less thorn scrub that these specialists require. So I'll take a look at my study area. So my study area is in purple here. These are my 3 field sites. And I want to point out quickly, the refuge is here. And so this is where I'll be referring to as the refuge population. And then up here is the ranch population of ocelots. And I also want to point out just exactly where we are in South Texas and on the US map. And then these 3 red circles are road stretches that I'm particularly interested in. And down here we have FM 106, and this is a potential area, an ecologically important road stretch for ocelots. And in particular, it has potential to become an ecological trap, as ocelots will be moving closer towards the development. And then we also have SH 186 up here in the center, and this one is bisecting both of the populations in half. And then finally, we have US 77, which is a divided highway, and it has the potential for, in the future, for when or if ocelots are able to move west of 77 and occupy available thorn scrub. And this over here on the right is what it looks like. So I want to talk in more detail about these 3 highways. And so State Highway 186 is SH 186, and that's the one that bisects both populations. Farm to Market 106 is the one near the refuge population, and US Highway 77 is where the potential conflict could be in the future. And I want to take a look and compare some of these, and we can see that the annual average daily traffic rating, or AADT, from the years of my study is very similar across FM 106 and SH 186. And these are both roads that are one or two lane roads with single lanes in both directions. And some of the major differences of them is the speed limit. FM 106 has a speed limit that's less, and it also has an array of roads around it because it's closer to the population center, whereas SH 186 is by itself. And then also I want to point out that FM 106 has road crossing sites specifically built for ocelots on it, which could help the movement across these barriers. And then US Highway 77 is our most unique, and you can see it has two lanes in both directions, 10 times the AADT of the other two, and high speed limit. And I also want to point out on this road that they have a huge grassy median, and this could be a refuge area for cats that are potentially crossing the road. And you can see it's full of oaks and mesquites and horizontal cover for the cats, so they could easily bed down in there. So how do these three roads impact our cats? Well, directly, there are, of course, mortalities and habitat loss and fragmentation, but indirectly, it can cause behavioral disruption and increased stress for these cats. Potentially in the future, it can also cause a reduction in gene flow and a reduction of habitat connectivity. And I talked a little bit earlier about the ecological traps where a cat could cross over the road and then be stuck in an area that can't support it. And also human activity increase. So as roads are built in an area, more humans come in and could develop even further. So today I really want to focus on behavioral disruption and the behavioral impacts of these barriers. So my question for you all for the project is, how do roads influence these movement patterns, and what extent do they act as barriers? So some of my objectives for today are to quantify how these roads influence the movement decisions, and then also evaluate the permeability of the road landscape, and look at it sort of like a matrix. So some of the methods. So for this in particular, I used 13 collared bobcats from a 3 years period across 3 different field sites, and their collars, they were fitted with collars with 1 hour constant fixed rates. And this resulted in almost 50,000 GPS telemetry locations. And I focused on cats that were in close proximity, specifically within 300 meters of a paved road. And I performed a barrier behavior analysis. So now I'm going to talk a little bit about what a barrier behavior analysis actually is. And so basically what it is an individual level categorization method based off of space and time. So it takes into account how long a cat has been within the buffer of the barrier. And for this in particular was 300 meters. So once it gets in the 300 meter buffer zone, then what does it do? And it defines the behaviors that the points are showing. So in particular, it gives 3 big categories, and it is normal, altered, and trapped movements. And there are quick movements, and these are the quick cross and the bounce. These movements are quick. They're coming into contact for a little bit. And then the average movements is interesting because it takes into account a lot of the past movements, and it'll say what like line straightness and turn angles, and calculate if it's an average movement and not affected at all by the barrier. And then altered movements include some of the back and forth and trace. And these movements can become trapped if they're there for a longer duration. So it's sort of a gradient going down. And I want to get into, before I get into the results of the barrier behavior analysis, I want to get into a little bit of the crossing data and the crossing results. So if you can see up here, I want to point out first that we had over 300 instances of crossings from male bobcats, and we had 8 males and 5 females. So, and then for the females, we had only 16 crossings. So there's a big difference there. And then also I wanted to point out the bobcat HB729233 male, or as I'll call him, HB33 male. And he actually had a higher crossing rate, had more number of crossings than the number of events. And this is possible because the event starts when he comes into the 300 meter barrier. And if he spends a long time. He can cross this road multiple times during this event. And it is, in particular, this cat had multiple events that were over 20 hours long, and even had a couple events, or had one event in particular that was 34 hours long. So he stayed within the buffer zone for 34 hours and crossed the road multiple times. So this is the reason you see his number being so high. And then also I wanted to point out this bobcat, LV 727047, and this cat had the most number of events and number of crossings. And this was because it went right up to an offshoot off of FM 106 that is near developments, and it's a smaller road that is easier to cross for the animal, and he would cross it on a nightly basis almost. And now I want to group these up by road section. So in particular, and I also added a new column called average duration. So this is the average time of each event. And so I wanted to point out SH 186 in particular, and it has the lowest crossing rate and also the longest average events. So this shows the highest like barrier strength. And then, well, all right, I hope it will in my analyses. And then US 77 seems to be skewed higher with the crossing rate, but the average duration is actually lower than 186 or higher than FM 106, which is kind of the intermediate road. So here are the barrier behavior analysis results. And I want to point out, in particular with FM 106, it had the shortest duration on the last slide. So it was, you would hope to see more bounce movements and quick crosses, and that's exactly what we see here. So the quicker behavior types are being seen more often on this cat. And then also SH 186 showed the most signs of barrier effects on the last slide. And you can now see that we did end up seeing a lot of bounce and the least amount of normal events, or the average and quick cross in green. And then finally, we have US 77, which for being the biggest road has the largest number of these normal events and least number of bounce events, but it actually could be a double-edged sword, and it has the most number of trapped events. But I think this is pretty skewed by the cat that I was talking about earlier, an HB 33 male. And I wanted to talk a little bit more about his results in general. And this is his graph. And you can see almost 50% of his events were these normal events. So when he comes in within 300 meters of a road, almost 50% of the time, he's not being affected. And then he does end up having a lot of trap movements, but there could be a lot of potential reasons for this. And I was trying to think of some, and he's actually a younger male when we caught him. So I want to point out, I have a video of some of his movements. And in this, you'll see he kind of starts down here on the right and works his way up. And this is taken from a week of his movements. And in this week period, he crosses the road a lot of times. It's hard to even count. And he crosses the road a lot of times and stays in close proximity. And it seems to me like he got kicked out of this territory and is trying to find new territory. But maybe he has found a way as well. We'll see it. He has sort of short bursts during the night where he crosses quickly, and then during the day it seems like he stays within the median or on one of the sides of the road. So I'll play this now. And yeah, he ends up going all the way around and ending back where he started a week later. And these movements are extremely interesting to me, and maybe could show some behavioral plasticity that occurs in our bobcats. So here are some more final results that I had. And in particular, so these are classified based off normal, altered, and trapped. And the normal behaviors are these quick crosses and average movements where they're not being affected. And the altered are the bounce, trace, and back and forth movements. So in areas where you'll see more green, there's less of a barrier effect. And then in areas where you see more red and orange, there's more altered behavior. And in particular, if you look at SH 186, the east portion of it seems to have a better better connectivity and is more permeable to the cats than this western section. And then if we look at FM 106 in the center, you can see that the cats are tending to cross this smaller road that runs north to south rather than FM 106, which runs sort of through the area. And it would be interesting in the future to see if I get more cats that are actually alongside this road to see if this will change. And then US 77 is kind of skewed again by HB 33 male, but you can still see there's a lot of orange and red along the sides of it. So with more future work and research, I'm hoping that these results and future results can help guide placements of wildlife crossings, fencings, and speed reduction areas. And hopefully it can also provide some context for genetic findings that we have. So if there's evidence of a reduction of gene flow, that my results will back that up. And then it also can help detect some at-risk populations, especially with the ocelots in areas of isolation, and look at some individual variation in behavioral plasticity that I was mentioning earlier. And in the future, I want to replicate these methods for the rest of our historical bobcat data set, which uses a variety of different fixed rates, and see if we see the same trends that we're seeing right now with just this smaller data set. And I also want to replicate this for ocelots and compare and contrast these results to bobcats and see if there's a difference between the specialists and generalists. And I also want to pair these findings with other genetic research that people in my lab are doing and see if our results complement each other very well. And this season just ended for trapping, but we had over 30 bobcats and 20 ocelots, and at least half of these were within a kilometer of the road. So it could be a lot more data for me in the future. And I also will be continuing my master's and identify some of the road, and I hope to identify and compare road crossing sites versus roadkill sites and see why there's success and not successful and unsuccessful in crossing roads. So I want to acknowledge Texas Department of Transportation. They've funded my project, and also the graduate students, undergraduates, and research technicians that helped collect data. And my contact info is in the bottom left, and I want to leave it with the video of a bobcat that we recaptured earlier in the season. And then I'll take any questions. Yeah. Makes it look easy running through the thorn scrub. Yes. Any questions? Yes, in that.
So, looking at the roads, I would have thought that Highway 77 would have been the toughest cross. But if you have that one cat excluding your data, look at the data excluding that cat, and is it harder to cross, or do you think there's a reason that it's easier to cross than some of the other smaller roads?
So, two answers to that. I can repeat the question too. So he was wondering, he had a question about US 77. We would expect it to be easier to cross than the smaller roads. And he was wondering if it was skewed that heavily and if we looked at it without that cat in it. And my answer to that is I haven't looked at it without the cat in it yet, but I plan to do that. And once I incorporate the rest of my data set as well, I want to see how it looks fully, and then without that cat in particular. But it also brings up a good question of whether we include only transient individuals or individuals that don't have a home range set, and see the difference between cats that are more likely to cross roads and explore new areas. I don't know if that answered your question, but yeah. Yes.
Possibly a related question is, I'm wondering about, do you know whether when they're making these road crossing movements, is it always that great, or are they also incorporating perhaps some drainage structures in those movements, like culverts, existing culverts?
So she was asking about whether if they're just crossing right over the road or using culverts. And there are culverts, and I think that is a factor of it, especially at FM 106, where there are road crossing structures. And built for cats specifically, and I think they are using those pretty heavily. But in most of these cats, I want to, in the future, overlay with the road crossing structures and see if those areas in particular we're seeing a correlation of, oh, yes, there's less barrier effects in that certain area. Yeah.
Do you think the road with the divided median that's vegetated and, you know, you showed the video of what appeared to be track moving parallel within that median? Do you think that median is serving as a safe haven or as an ecological trap for cats to be with the road fill data around those areas to see if there's higher instances?
Yeah, I think, so the question was whether the median areas, so especially on US 77 where it's divided, whether I think that these areas are ecological traps and, or if they're providing refuge for the cats. And I think that kind of a mixed bag, a bit of both. I think they are providing refuge, especially some of the cats that are learning to sort of hunker down during the daytime and take use of the cover. But I also think that, especially that cat in particular, he was being trapped inside and he kind of was just going back and forth trying to find a safe place to cross and failing. But I also think there's a couple other theories too, and I think that potentially there's some untapped prey availability that could be in the median of the road. It sounds weird, but it's thick enough, and I know it might be something where they come in periodically. But yeah, I don't really know quite yet, but great question.
Thank you, Sean.
Yes, thank you.
Thank you.